Now let's take a look at the structure of this course. The goal is to teach you how to set up an incubator hedge fund. Keep in mind that this is not a trading strategy course. And again, this is about how to set up the structure of an incubator hedge fund. In the introduction lecture, we'll talk about what is an incubator hedge fund. And we'll talk about why you might want to consider setting up an incubator hedge fund. In the hedge fund regulations lecture, we'll talk about from a very high level, from a 30,000-foot level, some of the regulations, including advertising regulations that you should be conscious of when you set up an incubator hedge fund. And then we'll get into the various hedge fund databases. And this is where you might be able to submit your performance to gather interest for your fund. I'll give you the list of top hedge fund databases. And also we'll talk about a legislation called the Jobs Act. And then we'll get into the different types of investors. We'll talk about accredited investors and qualified investors and why that's important. And then we'll briefly talk about the hedge fund fee structure. And again, we'll get into the management fee and the performance fee and how that is related to accredited investors and qualified clients. And then we'll get into the hedge fund structure, and we'll talk about the term general partner and why that's important. And then in lecture 13 through 17, we'll talk about LLC, a limited liability company, and how the LLC is taxed, the LLC structure, how the LLC is set up, and again, talk about some of the costs involved, especially if you want to set it up in Delaware. So section 9, we're going to talk about entity search, meaning if you have a specific name for that limited liability company or the management company you want to form, how do you search to find out that that name is currently available? So we'll do a lecture on that, then we'll go into an example to show you how to actually search, and I will provide you with that website address where you can go and search. One of the requirements in Delaware and in many other states when you want to form a management company or a limited liability company is to have a registered agent. So we'll go through how to find a registered agent, and we'll go through an actual example of a registered agent. And then we want to be able to form the management company or the LLC. So we'll go through the certificate of formation, an example of the certificate of formation, how to actually fill that form out. Then we'll look at the summary of what we have accomplished so far with the LLC and the management company. Then we'll get into starting in lecture 27, we'll get into the partnerships, and we'll talk about different types of partnership, the partnership structure, and how that partnership structure is related to the hedge fund structure. And again, we'll provide a high-level overview, a visual of that as well. And then we'll talk about the limited partnership setup cost involved for Delaware. And again, for section 12, it is very similar to the LLC setup, but it's a little different as well. So we'll look through the step-by-step on how to actually set up the limited partnership in Delaware. So we'll do the entity search to make sure the name is available. We'll look at the registered agents, the examples, how to actually fill out the certificate of formation for the limited partnership, an example of that. With the limited partnership formation form, we would have to send out a cover memo as well. We'll look at how to fill that out. And then we'll look at a summary of what we have accomplished so far and how that fits in the hedge fund structure. In section 13, we'll talk about brokerage accounts. Now, after you set up a hedge fund structure, many hedge funds trade through prime brokerages. But many people that might be listening to this course may not have the funds to actually open up a prime brokerage, and you have to trade with discount brokerages. So we'll look at some of the discount brokerages, but we'll also look at some of the issues that might come up by using a hedge fund structure with a discount brokerage. So Then we'll talk about, what would be the best structure to overcome some of the barriers with discount brokerage. And we'll talk about single member LLC. And we want to make sure we actually keep up with the structure we just created and pay the annual fees with Delaware or some other state. So we'll specifically talk about Delaware tax and the example of that. The other thing that you might need when you open up the brokerage account with an LLC or the limited partnership structure is something called the EIN number. And we'll talk about how to actually obtain the EIN number. Then finally, we want to be able to trade in a brokerage account. So I'll walk you through an example of how to actually fill out an LLC application with a discount broker, and talk about that and give you an example of that as well. Then we'll get into some of the advanced topics once you go from an incubator hedge fund to a full-fledged fund, in terms of how to raise capital, how to actually find investors, how to find high net worth individuals. We do have some websites that I can share with you on raising capital, and we'll briefly touch on various hedge funds documents when you're going from incubator hedge fund to a full-fledged fund. So basically, that's the gist of the course, and I hope you'll join me inside for this course.